Today in Ancient DOS Games, we're taking a look at Transport Tycoon Deluxe, often considered to be a sequel to Railroad Tycoon, which I covered on the show a while back, though Railroad Tycoon did get an actual sequel in the late 90s. In any case, at first glance, this game pretty much looks like a cross between Populous and SimCity, although it absolutely plays far more like Railroad Tycoon than either of those two games. The main difference being that instead of simply creating and managing railroads, you now also handle bus routes, shipping lanes over the water, and airports. In fact, the gameplay is so similar to Railroad Tycoon that this will probably be a shorter video than usual, because really, all I really need to go over are the differences between the two games, because, quite frankly, if you know how to play Railroad Tycoon, you can be up and running in this game in minutes. Although, that said, the difficulty here is surprisingly high, mostly coming down to the AI having access to more information than the player. Thus, the AI will always take the most lucrative options for building its empire, leaving you in the dust if you didn't, regardless of the skill setting. And as for the differences between the original Transport Tycoon and the deluxe version, it mostly just comes down to having additional landscapes and some gameplay tweaks, and they're otherwise not any different from each other, at least as far as I can tell. Transport Tycoon was developed by Chris Sawyer Productions and published through MicroProse in 1994, with the deluxe version debuting the following year in 1995. It's a 1 to 2 player simulation game, with the multiplayer working as you would expect across a modem or network connection, requiring SVGA 640x480 256 color graphics, and supports an interesting array of audio devices. As for its current release date, it's still commercial and actually kind of tricky to get a hold of. Not because it's rare or anything like that, but because there's various different releases of the game, not to mention it came out for more than just DOS computers, and on top of that, the prices are just all over the place, and I mean all over the place. When looking through sold listings, I occasionally ran across fully boxed copies which sold for less than loose copies, with some copies sold for as little as $3 or some being sold for as much as $50. And there really is no distinction between any of it. Basically, because of that, you're far better off just waiting for a good deal on a specific release than going for whatever's available just to get it faster. Also, just one thing to quickly point out, the release I have is the Infogrames replay release from the late 90s, which confusingly says that it's for Windows, but not supported by Windows 2000 Pro or ATI Radeon video cards. Let it know, if you look at the system requirements, this is very much a DOS game through and through, so as long as your hardware can run DOS software with VESA-compliant SVGA graphics, you're good. Before starting a new game, the very first thing you'll want to do is configure your difficulty settings, because as you're going to see, there's a ton of settings to choose from. Now, if you don't care about getting into the high score tables, you can customize these settings however you want. This is pertinent because even on the easy setting, the AI players are ruthless and will decimate you if you don't know exactly how to win a map. So you may wish to turn them off and treat this more like a software toy than a proper game. I left them on and ultimately regretted doing that. You can also adjust various game options in terms of how money is expressed, units of measurement, among other region-specific things. But it's better to set these after starting a new game, as these settings are saved along with each map. So setting them here on the main menu is kind of pointless unless you're playing a randomly generated map. There's also a small set of pre-recorded tutorials which serve mostly to showcase the basics of the gameplay, showing how to set up buses, trains, ships, and planes. Plus there's also a section for more advanced train stuff, as if you start to interconnect multiple tracks with multiple trains, you'll need to set up signals for them similar to how it's done in real life. You can also choose which type of terrain you want from 4 choices: temperate, subarctic, subtropical, and toyland, each of which has its own unique resources to manage, though beyond that and the looks of these places, they all play exactly the same. Unlike in Populous, where the type of landscape had effects on population fertility and survivability. The choice of terrain here determines which list of maps you'll pull up when starting a new game or playing a scenario. Now, you'll notice the list of scenarios is empty at first, and this is because this is how the game differentiates pre-made content and user-made content. New Game lets you choose pre-made content, and Play Scenario lets you play user-made content. Simple as that. In any case, upon starting a new game, you'll be prompted to set up your manager profile and select a color for all of your vehicles and such. And one thing I find odd is that there's a random face generator here designed to produce caricature-style photos of business tycoons, but short of selecting your gender, you have no control over the fine details of the outcome. Well, you can also name your business empire whatever you want. You don't have to go with the generated default, which is based on the name you give your manager. The goal in Transport Tycoon is to be the leading transport company in the world by the end of 100 in-game years, based on corporate valuations of yourself and your competitors. Now, to do this, you need to set up transport services between locations by building, loading, and unloading areas to service surrounding structures, laying down roads, bridges, tunnels, rails, and other such things, and giving your vehicles routes to take, and sometimes assigning them additional orders when they reach those destinations. And if that sounds a lot like Railroad Tycoon, then yeah, it works practically the same way. But you do have a bit more control over the outcome here, and many aspects have been simplified. For instance, when placing a loading bay for vehicles or a train platform, a pop-up window will actively indicate what kinds of things will be available for receiving if you plop down the building in that exact location. Now, turning on the catchment area highlight will show all the tiles which are in range of the building. Now, you can use the query tool to inspect individual buildings to see what kinds of things they want to receive. The tricky thing though is that you don't get an active report on what things will be available for transporting, so you'll need to query buildings ahead of time to figure that out. Though I will say, any location which wants to receive passengers or mail will also have passengers and mail available to transport elsewhere. One thing I should point out too is that you can query buildings in two different ways. Using the query tool gives you details on the building itself and the things it receives, but to actually get information on what's being produced, among other things, you actually want to click on buildings without any tools selected. Yeah, it's definitely a bit confusing at first that there's two different ways to get information on things, which both produce different information. Once you've set up a route of some sort, the next thing to do is to place an appropriate building somewhere in the route which can generate new vehicles and maintain those vehicles. Now, if you set up a route and don't have one of these stations on it, the vehicles on that route will deteriorate much faster and thus break down far more often. And when something breaks down, you simply have to wait for a bit for it to get back into action, but this entire time it's likely losing you money, so suffice to say, the less breakdown something has, the better. Once you have a vehicle ready, you have to give it orders. Now, this simply amounts to telling it which loading areas to visit in which order, though you do have some extra control over this in the form of full load and unload orders. If you assign a destination to full load, the vehicle will wait in this location until it's fully loaded, whereas normally it'll simply pick up whatever's available and immediately move out. Now, you'd think this would have an effect on fuel costs or reliability or something, but no, as far as I can tell, it doesn't. So you mostly want to use the full load feature to maximize the efficiency of your system when appropriate. Setting a destination to unload, however, is a bit more interesting. Now, once you start getting into air transport and sea shipping, you're going to notice that it's often difficult to put these things within range of buildings which can receive certain commodities. So what you can do is use the unload command on a route destination to unload everything a vehicle has, even if that place it's at doesn't accept some of the things being unloaded, in which case they'll be left there and available for other vehicles to pick up. For instance, I set up a cargo ship to run gold from a gold mine to a loading bay across the ocean, which I then had several armored vehicles set up to distribute between a couple locations. However, this leads into something I didn't know about, which isn't really explained in the manual until right at the end as just sort of a casual fact, as though you're somehow supposed to understand this ahead of time. The further something travels in this game, the more money you get for it at the other end. All commodities, passengers, whatever, are tracked by the location that they came from. The distance between that and the destination they're moved to determines the amount of money you get for the trouble. This explains why, in my first attempt to play this game, my oil distribution train was making a paltry amount of money compared to the massive quantity of money the AI was making running lumber long distances. The commodities themselves don't really have any well-defined values to them. The distances involved are what matter the most. I didn't find out this was happening until after I'd already captured a whole bunch of footage and tanked hard against the AI every step of the way, and I imagine I likely would have made way better progress and have been able to experience more of the game had I known about this. But again, the manual says nothing about this until the very end in a very casual way, as though you should have already known this extremely pertinent and game-changing detail. For instance, one of the things I wasn't able to do because I couldn't get far enough to try it was to invest in industries. You do this by getting to place factories and other such locations anywhere you want, the trick being that they're extremely expensive. But by doing this, you're effectively creating a new place to earn income from, so can pay off in the long run. You're also able to invest in the stocks of your competitors if you're able to get enough money to do so. But while competitors can theoretically go bankrupt, the more likely scenario for knocking them out is to simply buy up all of their stocks, which effectively buys them out and converts all of their assets into your own. Again though, I wasn't able to get anywhere close to being able to do this. The last thing to mention is the custom scenario editor, because yes, you can put together your own maps, either built from randomly generated land, from crafting the land by hand, or a combination of the two. You can plop down cities, industries, do a bit of landscaping, and effectively make your own map to play on. Obviously this takes a while, and given the sheer quantity of pre-made maps included with the game, not to mention the ability to randomly generate a map when starting a new game, there's not much of a necessity to use this feature unless you really enjoy this thing. Hey, a short episode which is actually fairly short for once. But yeah, overall, I like the concepts and gameplay of Transport Tycoon, but it definitely feels a little rough around the edges and is not explained very well. The way the game works is thankfully not too complicated once you do have it figured out, but the relentless AI, coupled with the inability to alter the speed of the game, demands that you play each map perfectly to come out on top. I mean, yeah, there is a big pause button in the top left corner, but you're not allowed to build anything while the game is paused. Basically what it comes down to is that it's tough to get into this game as a game, but there's definitely fun to be had if this appeals to you on any level and you're willing to go through that learning process. Once again, super easy DOSBox configuration, as all you have to do is leave cycle set to auto and it should work perfectly fine. One thing to keep in mind though is that when the digitized audio plays its very first sound effect in the game after booting it up, you'll also get a very loud pop. So I recommend keeping the volume down until it's had a chance to happen, then you can turn it up. Anywho, that's all for today's episode of Ancient DOS Games. Next week will be a filler, and I'm going to be talking about something I already talked about once before, but it's something where the dynamics have changed considerably over the past decade, and I want to address how things have changed and what the state of it is now. So be sure to tune in next Saturday to hear what I've got to say about this topic. Thanks for watching, everyone, and extra special thanks to those of you supporting me on Patreon. Here's just a small random set of you guys.